Great. So let's start this second session of the special SPA-CEnet session on this conference. This is a session on territorial governance arrangements for resilience in urban-rural interaction. And it is at the same time a yearly conference of SPA-CEnet. SPA-CEnet is a network of spatial research and planning institutions in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. SPA-CEnet is coordinated by the Leibniz Institute of Ecological, Urban and Regional Development in Dresden, Germany, and by the Spectra Institute at the Slovak University of Technology in Bratislava. My name is Artem Korzhenevych from the Leibniz Institute of Ecological, Urban and Regional Development. And I am the moderator of this session. We will have 4 presentations in the session, and we will start right away with Łukasz Mikula from Adam Mickiewicz University. For those of you who follow this session in the live stream in the app, you can pose your questions in the chat, and we will read them after the presentations are over. Okay, Łukasz, the floor is yours. If you can turn on your mic, we already can see your slides.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
And can you see my presentation?
Yes, it would be good if you could go to the
full screen.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you. It's great to be here in this very interesting conference on arboreal partnerships. And I want to tell you something about lessons from Poland, how this urban, suburban, and rural partnership works in spatial planning, especially in the large metropolitan areas. First, let me start with some general remarks. As I said, metropolitan areas are a mixture of urban, suburban, and rural environments. And urban pressure on countryside is, in fact, one of the most important drivers for more integrated, comprehensive, metropolitan-like spatial planning. And especially suburban zones in transitions are here extremely interesting, as they are neither urban nor rural, but they are very dynamically changing. The question is that formal planning systems, its instruments, procedures, usually refer to some kind of regular territorial units as municipalities or sometimes regions, large regions, but metropolitan areas, well, most often they do not match this territorial administrative divisions. Therefore, they need some non-regular solutions, institutional solutions for spatial planning. And I will go to the perspective of Central Eastern Europe with post-socialist countries, where suburbanization and urban sprawl were main challenges for planning for metropolitan areas, well, for last 30 years, in fact. And 3 main drivers of this process were the privatization of state assets, the regulation of economic activity, and the centralization of political power, especially devolution of planning powers to local level to municipalities from state administration. So restitution and privatization of land, especially agricultural land, it made possible a creation of real estate market, abolition of state monopoly in investment activities proved to be critical, as many private investors, developers went into the building market. And trends towards liberalization of spatial planning systems meant that there were simplified procedures for transforming agricultural land into investment areas. So we moved from strict state control over spatial development in the socialist period towards quite liberalized, even more when you compare it to Western Europe, to very liberal system of spatial planning and development, where private investment, private investor, private property was in many cases put on higher value than public interest, as some kind of reaction or overreaction to all the strict regulations, planning regulations from previous period. And as planning powers were transferred to municipalities, first of all, it meant some kind of downfall of regional planning, as second-tier units of territorial administration remained usually part of state administration, of this old state administration. So there was a rise into power of municipal planning, but it was paired by growing financial self-dependence of local governments with lower state subsidies. And it meant that in some cases, very aggressive land use policy, extensive spatial development policy, was considered to be one of alternative sources of financing for municipalities, and especially in suburban areas, which were transforming from rural countryside environments into more mixed investment areas with very heavy investment pressure in housing and in industrial service. So just quick look into our case study. I will elaborate it further, but you can see Poznań metropolitan area with all new residential and industrial areas planned by municipalities. Here, this is combined on one map, and these are only new greenfield areas. So now there is nothing there. Yeah, so you can see all these orange residential future areas and red. These are mainly commercial areas. How they could look 10 years from now if all municipal plans would be fulfilled. Hope it will not come. I will talk about it later. Especially if you look just behind the boundary of city itself, this blue line, you can see this huge amount of new investment areas planned for development by municipal governments of suburban zone. Most of them are, in formal terms, these are rural municipalities according to Polish law. But as you can see, their development plans are very urban or I would say suburban in character, with this mosaic of different land uses and generally lack of idea for or vision for more sustainable development, spatial development of the metropolitan area as a whole. And here's another interesting case. Here are some numbers. You can compare existing investment areas. These are or already built up areas. These are these bars in black. And then you have with red line the amount that is needed to fulfill demographic forecast for future development. So how many new investment areas for housing, for example, we need to match demographic expectations. These are these red lines for every municipality, and these gray bars are actually planned in municipal documents areas for further development. In some cases, it's 5 or 10 times more than could be really developed if all demographic forecasts are correct. So huge oversupply of this investment area in planning documents. And here's how it looks. There are some started but unfinished developments in suburban zone, often cut off from any infrastructure or from already in existing settlements. And this is how urban sprawl looks like in Poland, for example. It became developing of land. It became one of the main sources of income for farmers or ex-farmers in this, as I said, legally rural municipalities, but in fact with very dynamic development into housing and other land uses. What did national government about this? Well, not much. If in fact the last 30 years are the history of failed top-down approaches to metropolitan planning. First, we started with revival of local government. Okay, that's most important, to give power to local communities. Then we had regional and county reform, empowerment of regional self-government and county self-government. Of course, especially regional government was important in anticipation of accession to European Union. But then somewhere between county and regional level, we lost metropolitan area. They are somewhere in between, but they are not recognized by a system of spatial planning and general territorial division. While there are most dynamically growing areas in the country with very strong linkages between urban cores, these large cities, and suburban zone consisting of many autonomous, in fact, municipalities. We have something that is meant to be replacement for this general institutional solution, which is called Integrated Territorial Investment Instrument. You probably know it from other countries, but this is more project-based approach instead of more general institutional solutions. In only one case of Upper Silesia, there was attempts to more formalize metropolitan government, but it's still in its initial phase. So our key dilemmas are: did this municipal autonomy in planning, in land use policy, did it go too far? And if we need metropolitan level of planning, and we know we need it, but we don't have strong legally based national institutional solutions, can we replace it with more bottom-up created models based on flexibility, on consensus, on negotiation between stakeholders? And this is our dilemma. And the rest of my presentation will focus on this issue. My case study is Poznań metropolitan area, one of 5 largest metropolitan areas in Poland. It's western part of Poland. More or less 1 million residents as a whole, and 500,000, half of them in city proper, another 500,000 in suburban zone, which is very dynamically growing. Okay? So we have few key players. It's a core city government, city of Poznań government. It's county of Poznań, which covers 17 suburban municipalities. There are 21 suburban municipalities. Most of them, or half of them roughly, is formally rural. In fact, it's more developed or urbanized than many formally urban municipalities in the rest of the country. It's an area very strongly affected by suburbanization and urban sprawl. Here you have some numbers with dynamics of growth in the number of residents and the number of homes for last 10 years. In some cases, it has nearly doubled in terms of number of homes. And demographic development, especially in this first ring of municipalities around the city, is very, very huge. And on the other hand, it's also most advanced case or example of bottom-up metropolitan cooperation in Poland, in this way that comes or begins with some informal body called Agglomeration Council, which was just a round table of mayors from city, county, and municipalities towards more formalized institutional solutions, but still voluntary and bottom-up, and developing at the same time more and more strategic documents like joint development strategy or metropolitan spatial development study, or finally spatial development concept. Okay, so spatial development concept, it was from combining municipal plans that give us such picture as here, to more sustainable metropolitan vision, in which most of these extensive land use policies are cut by half or more to make it more compact, more sustainable, more transit oriented for public transit, based not on system of highways but on metropolitan railway. So it's a move from this aggressive, extensive land use policy based on roads, which is followed by municipal governments for last 20 or 30 years, towards more metropolitan-wide look into and comprehensive look into more public transit oriented development, not so much consuming agricultural land, especially in rural areas. And my research question in this case study were questions about the main drivers for this bottom-up cooperation. What made local mayors and officials to cooperate over these problems if they didn't have obligation to do it? Is a more political space for stronger planning integration? And maybe question that is most important, how strong is the impact of this metropolitan spatial development concept on planning policies at the municipal level? What is transmission? What is implementation of metropolitan visionary planning to, well, this more day-to-day municipal practice? I made some interviews, about 50 interviews with political leaders and planning officials, and I also analyzed documents, municipal documents, if they acknowledge the existence of metropolitan vision, and if the ideas from metropolitan vision are implemented into municipal documents. So here are my main findings. So it was most obvious that main driver for developing this bottom-up metropolitan planning were land use policies of suburban municipalities. They were overextensive, out of control. So this was main factor, but key actors behind this metropolitan spatial development concept were not suburban municipalities itself, but city of Poznań, core city, which thinks about suburbanization as a serious threat for finances of the city, as more and more people are moving out from city to suburban zone. But if it cannot be stopped, then it should be made more sustainable and transit oriented. And this is why this voluntary bottom-up metropolitan planning can help, or at least there is hope that it can help. And also County of Poznań, so it's suburban self-government, it's suburban government, but it's not municipal level, it's second tier. They also have some ambitions to have more control over this very dynamic development, as they are, well, let's say, paying for roads. Yeah, so all this development is heavy burden for their infrastructure, for their financing, and they want also to have more control over development in suburban zones, over these municipal policies. What was reaction of suburban municipalities from my interviews? I'm going right into conclusions. Well, it was quite different in every case, because it depended on some kind of auto-reflection of individual mayors over land use policy of his or her own municipality. Some of them were enthusiastic towards metropolitan planning, some skeptic, most neutral. For them, more important in metropolitan cooperation is access to financing, to external funding for their projects. Many of them, to admit, they are oriented for public transportation. So development of public transportation in this metropolitan-wide scale goes well, but they are not so much interested in adjusting their spatial planning documents to this metropolitan document. So implementations goes much better in investment projects for public transport than in land use planning and spatial policies. So just to go into conclusions, I would say implementation of metropolitan spatial development concept into planning documents at municipal level is in general quite poor. I analyzed these documents, and most of them, well, they retained this quite aggressive, extensive land use policies from the past, but sometimes this metropolitan vision, this metropolitan concept is used in political discussions at local level, usually when there is some too demanding landowner who wants more and more of his agricultural land to be turned in planning documents to be turned into, well, residential housing or commercial land use. So these are occasions where local mayor says, hey, we have this metropolitan-wide spatial vision, and changing your agricultural land into another investment area is against this metropolitan policy. So in some cases, it can stop going more and more into this bad idea of turning all of the municipality into one large investment area. So my final conclusion is that this bottom-up approach to metropolitan planning, it helps to develop consciousness about among officials and planners how good planning should look like in their municipalities. But in fact, it cannot, this bottom-up planning, overcome the most problematic features of formal planning system in Poland, which is over-liberal in many cases, and it encourages investors and developers to turn new greenfield areas into new residential and commercial zones. Thank you very much, and I hope that there will be some discussion about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Lukasz. We have 10 people following the session in the live app. I don't see questions there in the chat, but maybe we have questions here from the group. If you have questions, just wave with your hand or let me know somehow else. Okay, so it doesn't seem to be the case currently. Thank you, Lukasz, for this presentation.
Thank you very much.
We will continue now with the next one. The next presentation is by Martin Scheucht, my colleague from the Leibniz Institute of Ecological Urban Regional Development. Martin, can you? Yes, we see your slides.
Okay, that's now you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you, but now
fine.
we don't see your slides anymore.
Yes, I share it again.
Great.
Okay,
Maybe can
now
you switch
see
into
PowerPoint?
full screen mode? Yes, perfect.
Yes,
Go
fine.
ahead.
Okay, thanks. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Martin Schorst from the IOER in Dresden. Together with Matthias Jeling and Thomas Hermann, we created a short approach. This approach should be helpful for a normative view on spatial processes. We called it densification as a regional challenge, a normative view on spatial processes and actors' interests. Here, for example, we see a small area which is developed over time. In the north, you see two row building houses. In the south, you see changed living houses. For example, if you see the difference. Or we have other examples of larger developments. Here we have a rail area which extensively developed to a living housing area. And so we come to different forms of densification. On the one hand, we're talking about soft densification. This belongs more on a small scale level, is mostly driven by local actors above the owners, and is below the planning level. Then we have a hard densification. This is more on large scale level, driven by external developers, and this belongs more to a formal planning. So there are positive and negative aspects of densification. Positive are, for example, more living space for more people. You get compact cities, and for that, shorter distances. And you are protecting rural areas from urban sprawl. But on the other hand, you also get negative aspects of densification. You have less green in the city, more soil sealing, congestion of urban infrastructure, and of course, city heat islands, which is caused by bad airflow. So looking on this, Benjamin Davy called this a planner's dilemma, 1997. He's talking about the principle of efficiency, but there are distributive effects. And at the end, he is coming to the question of justice. And in an idealistic planning view, you can more or less categorize three point of views. For example, you have the utilitarianism view, where you are planning along axes and central places, or you have a libertarian view, which is more driven by the land rent, or you have a social view, which is more focused on an equal distributed development. And the question on urban densification is who benefits from this development, who is adversely affected. And to answering these questions, we need a normative view on densification processes. And so we are taking LOD data in Germany, and with the measurements of changes in LOD data, we want to get an answer about the question where takes densification place, who is affected, and to what extent. This is the important question. So for the simple change detection, we use, as I said, LOD data. Here is an example of Frankfurt City, and orange marked the changed buildings. Here you have these two red circles. These are the examples I was showing in the beginning. For example, here we have two data sets at different time. And the result of the change detection is that we can differentiate between a replacement of living buildings or fills-built living buildings. And based on this change detection, we can get some indicators which are describing the densification themselves. For example, you can have a look on the change block per area. This is the right indicator, which is more or less an absolute indicator, or you can get a degree of possible change, which is measuring the previous open space, how much of the previous open space is built up. With this, you can describe densification processes a bit better than taking the absolute size. Now, when we are looking to our planning region, Frankfurt Rhine-Main, this is a bigger planning region around the city of Frankfurt. And here the interesting fact is the dark color indicates where are the strongest densification processes take place. And in Frankfurt City, even you don't have much place left, not all, but most of the development takes place there where not enough space left. So you get a concentration of the building clusters. And at the end, you can get a statistical view about the population density in contrast to the changing building area. And on the left side, you see a lower development area. On the right side, you see the high density developed areas. And as I said before, the interesting fact is on the right side, even if you have a lot of population living there, the most changes is in the in these areas where already a lot people are living. On the other hand, you have a high change ratio in not so densitive, or you have a high change rate in low developed areas. And if we come to the questions from Benjamin Davy, we can here see that this development is more driven by a libertarian fact and by a utilitarian fact. If it would be in social development, then it should be like this red line marked indicates. It should be more equal distributed, but in this case, it is not equal. It is more libertarian and utilitarian. So with this method, we get a normative view of densification processes, but there are also limitations. We have to talk, or we have to say there is also a normativity in data and data analysis themselves. And also we have a normativity in the interpretation of the data. This is a general problem with geodata themselves. And thanks for listening. If you are interested in more detail, you can have a look on the publication, which is linked here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Martin, it's a very interesting presentation. I really appreciate this combination of, let's say, normative question and technical data analysis. I have a question on this. Maybe you can share your slides again. I have a question on of your interpretation of this kind of U-shaped distribution, where you have low density on the. So it's slide 25. Yes. So if I'm not quite sure whether this is just an illustration or whether this is your interpretations that you have. You see this high development at the high density side.
Yes.
As a sign of utilitarian approach. I would say this is also a libertarian approach, because these are probably the areas where you have the highest rents and the highest return to area.
This is true. This is more an exemplary this is the next step we want to do. This is discussable, of course, but this is the direction we want to go to show which values are describing the utilitarian or the libertarian development.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it is the libertarian development and utilitarian development also mixed. And this is also a question how to unmix these two sizes. Yeah, you're right.
Yes. So I would. This looks interesting to me. I would encourage you to go further with this, and maybe to find a way how to distinguish quantitatively between these three different, let's say, normative approaches. Yeah.
Yes. This last step, adapting these views to the statistical data, it is not part of the paper. This is more or less our next step, I have to add. Yeah, and there we have to get more clearer. That's a good hint from you.
Okay.
And yes.
Do we have even more people now listening online? There are no questions or comment in the chat, but last time a question came a bit later than I looked at it, so maybe one will come also later to yours. Are there questions to Martin from the group? From the room here? I don't see any. I will check the chat again. So maybe, thank you, Martin. We have a question to the previous speaker from the chat. So Łukasz, you are still there, right? And
I'm here still.
Yeah. So sorry. So let us make it one by one. So there is a question from Professor Stoikov to the presentation of Martin Scheucht. Densification is densification reflecting power of capital or weakness of social consciousness? This is a very philosophical question.
We are just talking, when we are talking about densification, we are just having a look of changes in building area just in the view of data. The meaning of densification processes above the data, we haven't looked so far.
Yes, this is what you also said before. Okay, if I don't have more questions to the current speaker, then we get back shortly to Łukasz. There was a question by Tobias Henning here on this on your topic of metropolitan planning. How do you see the future of this cooperation? Are there chances for it to be deepened?
It is a very interesting question, because my observation is that when there was no money designated for metropolitan areas in Poland, this bottom-up cooperation went much better in fields like spatial planning coordination. It was then the main issue in this cooperation. When some European money appeared around 2015 with this ITI, Integrated Territorial Development Investment Instrument, the cooperation was switched more to investment project and less on land use strategy, on strategic planning. And I'm quite interested how it will go further, because we are not so sure about future of European funds in Poland at all. In fact, as you know, our national government wants to stop new European budget because of the rule of law question. However, okay, I think that there will be some European money for investment, for cohesion policy and on, but we are not sure if it will be specifically directed to metropolitan areas in Poland. And then I'm not so sure if these bonds of cooperation will last, as there will be no extra money, because now everybody is used to get as much money based on this cooperation from European as possible. So I think that the money from European Union a little bit corrupted this voluntary cooperation because it changed attention from strategic planning to realization of individual projects from European money. And this means that I cannot simply answer what will be the future of this cooperation, because there are so many things that must be settled.
Great. We also have a comment from a colleague of mine from IOER, Robert Knipschiff, that says that in Germany we also observe that the regional subsidies actually increase competition rather than contributing to increased cooperation. Okay, thank you. So we will proceed with the next presentation. Actually, I see all the 4 co-authors here in the chat. So, but I assume Matej will start, if this is correct. It's Matej, also from my colleague from the Leibniz Institute. So we see your slides. If you turn on your mic, we will hear you.
Okay,
Great.
so
go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation to present some first insights of our paper about governance in energy transition in coal mining regions, or governance of energy transitions, which I will present together with my colleagues Martin and Jessica. But I will start, and it should give some insights from 2 coal mining regions in Czech Republic and in Germany, which in the recent years gained some awareness since the energy and climate policies kind of supported the idea to phase out of fossil fuels, but also out of lignite coal mining and also lignite energy production. So the energy transition, or so to speak, the climate and energy policies became a driver of structural change in those regions. Besides the challenges of the energy transition, these coal regions already face some difficult demographic, social, and economic structures. And so the phase out is another kind of disruption in their development path, and it becomes clear that there's a need for a systemic change in these coal mining regions, which also means a restructuring of rural areas or partnerships, or the relationship between core and periphery to develop resilient regions. But there are also some opportunities, since this process is pulled out as a rather long-term or mid-term process, and there's a lot of support from the EU level, for example, from the Green Deal policies or the Just Transition platform, which is also a networking platform for these coal regions. And so to speak, for Germany as well, a lot of national strategies and funding. We will look into these regions from the lenses of sustainable transformation research and spatial or strategic planning. We choose this, for example, the sustainable transformation research offers a good heuristic to analyze transformation processes, especially the interplay that of multi-domain transitions in different domains, which also includes changes of cultural values and of practices, for example. It also shows up or conceptualizes the transition as interplay of multiple levels, which have different roles, but offer also various links for governance intervention or governance strategies. It conceptualizes transformation processes as endogenous development paths, where a spatial temporal context matters, but they can be shaped, for example, by joint learning processes, by generating positive visions of the future, which we heard in the beginning sessions yesterday in the keynotes a lot about, and with, for example, governance structure, which are supporting openness and innovative milieus, for example. And transitions are seen as a process which is not directed to a certain vision of new constellations, but it's more like the way to there. And like I said before, shared visions and a common understanding of specific contexts and the need for learning processes is quite crucial in there. And so this brings us up to the point that maybe spatial planning could offer a couple of advantages here to the process. So strategic planning, for example, offers a lot of methods for collaborative visions and social learning processes. They are used, planners are used to multi-stakeholder participation to also create this temporal frameworks and special organization for special needs, and to bridge the gap between like big visions or grand plans and incremental implementation processes. It can support governance rescaling and regional building processes, but it also shows the spatial strategic planning research shows that there can difficulties occur if dominant partners overtake processes. It's harder to realize in single domain regions, and sometimes people or processes struggle to integrate structural policies and spatial planning actors at the same time. So this also shows that our focus will be on strategic planning of this in the regions and maybe also on the national level. And therefore we come to the research questions. What are main influencing factors, challenges and barriers for the regional transformation resulting from the coal phase out? What role do visions and strategy play in the initial phase of the transformation process in both regions? And to what extent do they differ in their respective contexts? And there I give the word to Martin, to my colleague.
Thank you, Antje. We addressed these questions to two selected co-regions of the Usti region and Lusatia. These case study regions are characterized by the trends of declining coal productions and power generations, and of peripherization, not only as a result of recent declining coal production, not only as this, but also from the result of recent debates of climate change. They have been exposed to the trends of peripherization since the political transformations of the 90s, which was accompanied by the first wave of transformation of heavy industry in regions. And since these times, it was affected by the outmigration of young and well-educated populations and loss of political and social significance. The Lusatian mining area is one of the 3 active coal mining areas in Germany today, on the borders of 2 federal states, Brandenburg and Saxony. The Usti region is located close to borders between Czech Republic and Saxony. They are located the largest Czech lignite mines. In the past, both regions were national powerhouses, and coal shaped not only economic performance of the regions, but also the identity of their inhabitants. The process of transition and the coal phase out is there connected with social uncertainties and fear of polarization or decline. With these 2 case study regions, we focused on regional governance and strategic planning on a regional level. Mainly, in particular, we focused on the process of region building and the transition process for more resilient regions. Next slide, please. The methodology that we used is an analysis of interplay of different levels, actors and role of governance, as well as strategic planning in 2 case studies. We focus on these 3 levels: the landscape level, containing discourses and framework settings on EU and national level, the regime level, focused on stakeholders, institutions, discourses, and social economic context. And the last level, strategic planning, focused on actors and forms and outcomes and upcoming challenges in both regions. The main methods that we used is document analysis, national, EU national and regional level, and semi-guided interviews and observations, mainly used in German case. Now, I would like to present you very briefly the Czech case study and the main insights into this. The Usti region can be characterized by long traditions of heavy and chemical industry, and almost 10,000 people are still employed in the mining industry in this region. So this makes the region very vulnerable to external shocks, and there is expected significant regional impact of transitions with social and economic consequences. The discussion about the coal phase out in Czech Republic is multi-level and multi-actor, as the coal and lignite is very significant commodity for the current energy mix and creates almost half of electricity production in 2019. There are still difficulties to find an appropriate governance structure and share this vision for the whole process of transformations. Next slide, please. And you can see the timeline here of the key milestones of coal phase out and the discussion process of transformation. The Czech government, and I will only highlight maybe the key aspects of this. So the key is that the Czech government declared its awareness of the problems in structurally disadvantaged regions and made a commitment to support them already in 2013. And this effort was covered by the Restart program established in 2016, which aims to the revitalization of 3 Czech coal regions in 7 thematic areas. Although the Restart program was designed to mediate more systematic support for regions undergoing structural changes and lagging behind other Czech regions, it can be expected to play a significant role in the process of just transition. The dynamic of phase-out strategy is influenced by the general discourse of Czech energy policy. The priority declared by the government is long-term energy sufficiency, self-sufficiency. The current political consensus is to replace the coal-based energy with nuclear energy, with limited emphasis on other alternatives such as renewable energy or natural gas. In 2019, the Czech Coal Commission was established, which was inspired by the similar arrangements in Germany. A structured discussion of the phase-out process is currently still ongoing, which causes several uncertainties. It's evident that a fixed phase-out date is important to set the framework for strategic planning at all levels of administration. At present, it seems that the phase-out is more of a top-down process, with the central government playing the key role. However, there is an evident effort to connect these discussions with conclusions from the Coal Commission established in 2019, which is a multi-actor and multi-level advisory board. At the same time, it's expected that each Czech coal region will have an opportunity to participate in the Just Transition Fund for upcoming years, where it's expected to prepare specific strategic plans for them, and clarification of the phase-out process seems very necessary for this. It's important to mention also that the discussion about the coal phase-out is very sensitive political topic in Czech Republic, whereas there was willingness to deal with this issue at times of economic prosperity in last years. It's unclear how political discourse will change in the post-COVID situation with expected significant economic declines. So that's about the Czech case study, and now I would like to give a word to Jessica, who will continue with introduction of the German case study.
Okay, now coming to our second case study. The Lusatia area is the second largest coal mining area in terms of production volume in Germany. And after being the energy center of the GDR, the region is already undergoing a structural change since 1990. But with new dynamics today, because of the decision to phase out coal in Germany until 2038. We can see a lot of trouble to find an appropriate governance structure for the new challenges which are linked to this phase out. And there are already a number of visions created on how to deal with the upcoming transformation, but those visions are neither comprehensive nor spatially integrated. They focus on management approaches with just little social innovation, and they are very little aware of sustainability aspects. So the question here is how strategic planning can contribute to the transformation of Lusatia towards sustainability. Looking at the milestones of the strategy process in Lusatia, we observed that the process is framed by the federal level, where there was a co-commission that set up the phase-out date and different perspectives for the regions in early 2019. And those results were then merged in a key issue paper by the government, which finally was the basis for the laws and funding guidelines that were adopted this year. And among other things, one of the laws ensures a sum of 17 billion euros as a structural aid for Lusatia. The strategy process on the state level of Brandenburg and Saxony is defined by 2 structural commissioners and separate agencies for structural development. That shows that the governance structures are strongly separated between the states, even if they work within one common region. The states also developed or are still developing separate strategies and visions for their part of Lusatia, even if there already exists a common strategy that was developed by the Zukunftswerkstatt Lausitz. Now coming to comparing our 2 case studies, it becomes clear that both regions have an unfavorable starting point because they had difficult experiences of transformation in the past. In Germany, we see a very dynamic process of institutionalization, while in the Czech Republic, the process has been strongly affected by the COVID-19 crisis. The strategic planning process shows that the regional strategies are highly adaptable to the financing requirements of the national programs, and it also shows a focus on jobs and economic investments, and there is no discussion of a specific sustainable transformation. It is a lack of coherent and inclusive strategies that can act as a common vision of the future due to regional governance restraints. And with regard to urban-rural partnerships, we see a lack of spatial strategies, and that the transformation strategies focus on thematic approaches, and too little attention is paid to the effects on spatial structures. So the question remains open in which direction the regions are moving when it comes to spatial distribution, so whether there will be a further concentration or peripheralization. Our first results show that the phase-out process and the sustainability transformation is a challenging task in non-metropolitan regions, especially because of the spatiality of the phase-out regions with specific identities and interplays of different actors. The upcoming phase will require greater responsiveness and responsibility at the regional level, so demanding for strategic planning, powerful visions, and concepts. The recent planning approaches are limited because so far spatial implications are disregarded, and strategic spatial planning could offer impulses for innovation, strategic thinking, and learning processes, but it needs an adaptation to the special regional conditions. Whether strategic planning can work for sustainable and resilient urban-rural or core periphery partnerships depends on governance structures and the roles in the process, so what an institutional framework is set. But we see that further research concerning bottom-up transition coming from private sectors is needed. And with this, I'm coming to the end of the presentation and would like to thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Jessica and Martin and Antje. We have already a question from the live app. Flava, you can see this question also in the chat from Flava Bisana. The question is, in your opinion, what are the important preconditions that regions or territories should have to facilitate this transition? Are there specific skills needed? Digital infrastructure? Other industrial sectors should be developed? The attitude to innovation should be different, or should be developed or educated somehow. So what are the lessons learned from your research? Did you hear me? So maybe one of you decides who wants to address this question.
I may start, and I hope Martin jumps in as well, or the other partners. So, I mean, what maybe should be clear with our presentation is that it was like what sustainable transition research often sees as a starting point for transformation is a crisis, a kind of a crisis. And this kind of crisis for this region, in this case, is more induced by different energy policies and climate policies for a start to kind of put up this dynamic in these regions. The question is not how to start, maybe, or what the precondition is for starting maybe a transformation process, but maybe for handling it, or to governing the process. I think it's this specific needs is actually an openness of the actors, and maybe openness also for cooperation and collaboration, and to overcome a little bit the old boundaries and structures which they are used to play in or used to act in. And yeah, I mean, when it comes to infrastructures, for example, or sectors which should be involved, I think the main thing, which is also mentioned in most of the programs, is a diversification strategy in economic sectors. And from our point of view, I think it's important in this transformation process to kind of raise the view a little bit, the perspective a little bit, or widen the perspective a little bit, to also see, next to the economic demands, which are definitely in these regions, to also have the look into the demands for sustainable and resilient regions, to we try to point out the ecological questions as well as the social questions, which is how we can take people, or how we can make sure that people participate, inhabitants of this region participate, and are opening up for these transformations, which are just started and will going on for the next years, and are needed for these regions to become sustainable regions in the future.
Yes,
yeah, I have a very brief comment, because I actually agree with what Anja said. I think that very important is in this context the shared vision of all actors, and to offering some alternatives. Yeah, what can be or how can look the future for them, and this I would say, like, improving the communication of all level, and to make the whole process more transparent and participatory, as Anja said, is I think very crucial.
Yes, what comes to my mind in this respect is that, I mean, here we are talking about the resilience or adaptability of regions, in the regional science sense. So what you say about common vision and leadership, for example. So my question would be whether this can make up really for some deficits, for some structural deficits in these regions. I mean, we know that regions that go through this kind of transition are all backward, let's say, have structural problems, yes? But do you think to some extent this, leadership or joint visions of different stakeholders can make up for some structural difficulties and lack of skills, for example?
Well, maybe not completely, but I think it's important to kind of have this vision to a positive vision of the future as well, to kind of motivate to think about certain innovations, because some of the maybe lacks when it comes to infrastructure, like for example, social infrastructure, it might need also some social innovation to work with less population, with different maybe age groups and things. So I guess that's why it's also important to think about what kind of maybe infrastructures are needed, or structures to overcome the lacks, or the gaps. But it's also important to have a vision, to know where maybe innovation is needed, where joint action is needed, and so on, and prioritize things which are on the list.
Yes. Okay, thank you, all the team for this presentation, and we will then go to the final presentation of this session, which would be by Annabella Diniz. If you can, Annabella, if you can share your slides and
yes.
turn on your mic.
Can you see it?
Yes, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. My presentation aims to give some inputs for the discussion of where and what kinds of innovation are needed for efficient and effective actions of the territory stakeholders. And this is analyzed in the context of global shifts and changes. And more precisely, this presentation aims to contribute to understanding and take full advantage of a global trend that may be the ultimate hope for rural dying territories, and it is the neo-rural movement. So what I'm going to present is the results of an exploratory study aiming to answer the following questions. So what are these new residents? What are their patterns of mobility? How do they live and work? How do they relate with the territory and with the rest of the world? And based on that, answer the question, are they all the same? And also to assess what are the impacts of these immigrants in the community, and what are the conditions for their permanence in the territory. This study focuses in the case of Portugal, where rural and peripheral regions have suffered exodus of population and consequent aging of the remaining population. However, in recent years, there has been a spontaneous phenomenon of people, urban and foreign, from urban and foreign areas coming to these territories. This phenomenon has already called the attention of the media and of some researchers, but still is little known about who are these people, why do they migrate, and what is the impact of such mobilities on local communities. So this phenomenon refers to the concepts of counter-urbanization, neo-rurals, and also patterns of mobility. The concept of counter-urbanization was originally proposed by Barry in 1976 in the specific context of the phenomenon of where he identified work on the United States. And the expansion of this movement to the rural world in many of the more developed countries has generated an intense and profuse literature. In simple sense, counter-urbanization is the antithesis of urbanization, making a symbolic break with the city, claiming the rural world as an alternative space and model of life. In similar sense, the concept of neo-rurality appears to designate the group of people who, by their own decision, abandon their place of origin, usually the city, to settle in rural areas. In other words, the concepts of counter-urbanization and neo-rurality are intended generally to characterize the movement of preference of rural spaces as an alternative way to the growing and excessive urban density. Concerning the patterns of mobility, it is important to recall the work of William and Hall, who in 2000 argued that new patterns of mobility emerged in globalized societies. And these new patterns represent a kind of continuum between the traditional tourism, more concerned with short permanence and leisure, pleasure, adventure, family motivation, and also the traditional migration, more concerned with more motivated by work and representing a long permanence. Between all these two poles, there are another kind of another patterns of mobility that can be classified along these two axes of classification. So, departing from these main theoretical concepts, we analyze a microphenomena, a case study in Portugal, in a small county called Penamacor, making use of several empirical sources of empirical data that allow it to assess to the statements of 27 neo-rurals and 12 local inhabitants. Just to situate in the map, Penamacor is located right here, a small point here, and the neo-rurals that we'll speak about are mainly located here in the south of this small county, in these small places. I give you some numbers just to have an idea of how small and peripheral is this county. So we have, this is the county of Penamacor. It has only less than 5,000 inhabitants. The population density is really, really small, and the aging index is one of the greatest of Portugal. So in 2012, it was the more higher aging index in Portugal, was in this county. By this time, after the last census in 2011, one of the most popular national newspapers, in a report about this municipality, announced the death of the small villages of this county, declaring them in extinction. But since 2017, the municipality of Penamacor made headlines again, but this time to deal with a striking phenomenon alluded in the headings of the media. So foreigners are given life to Penamacor as the highest rate of foreign residents in the interior, and so Penamacor was again in the news for this reason. This phenomenon is reflected in the evolution of the registered foreign people in Penamacor County between 2008 and 2018, where you can see that especially from 2016, there was the number of foreign population has undergone a substantial growth. I would like to show these numbers also to highlight the very small and decreasing population density. So in 2001, this is the year of one census, this year of the last census. So in 2001, there was a density of 11.8, still very small. But in 2018, the density was even smaller. And also want to show you the incredible increase in the weight of the foreign population in this small county. And you can see, for instance, here, Penamacor as the percentage of foreign people is 4.1 compared, for instance, with the other sub-region is much more high and compared with the national media average, sorry. And you can see here the percentage of increasing from in the last 10 years, but the biggest increase was here in the last years. You can also see in this graphic the evolution of the number of registration certificates issued by the Foreign and Border Service, and we can see that there is a strong weight since, again, 2016, from individuals from the United Kingdom, naturally as a result of the Brexit referendum. So people from the United Kingdom want to leave England and want to come to Portugal because they are in risk of leave Europe. And so the question is who are they? Who are these new residents, new incomers? And this is the description of an Irish New Panama Score residents that indicates the diversity of these residents: young people, families, retired people, people save online, and so on and so on and so on. But let's detail a little more about who are they. So concerning the motivations, we can distinguish at least two broad groups. Those that some authors call pure lifestyle immigrants, which are motivated by socio-ideological values, searching for an alternative way of living, whose lifestyle choice both reject the Marco ethos and economic rationalities. In a word, they reject the capitalist world. And they are based in a strong commitment with sustainability and with a strong connection with nature. But there are another group also that are lifestylers, but not the pure lifestylers. And those that basically are motivated by the individual concern of searching for a better quality of life, away from the urban foods, or also attracted by the possibility of realizing a personal project. For instance, to buy a piece of land, much more cheaper here than in their original homes, to develop, for instance, an agricultural project here. And concerning their patterns, their occupations, their mobilities, and the special frames of actions, we found that in their country of origin, these immigrants had professions linked to intellectual and scientific activities, which include artists, teachers, health professionals, and so on, but also a important group of skilled workers in industry, construction, craftsmen, intermediary technicians. These professions reflect relatively high levels of qualification if we compare with the average qualification of the native people, of the local people. Also, they are almost all engaged in agricultural activities, often combined with other professional activities developed locally or globally, and in this later case, making large use of information technologies. They also tend to be what some authors call citizens of the world and travelers, not only for their international occupations, but also because their mobility experiences and also considering their lifestyle attitudes and values, the connection with nature, and also the concern with sustainability, what, for instance, this author called these characteristics as travelers. Concerning their forms of mobility, these Panama Core new rules can be included in three groups that we have seen before. There are a group that can be included in the retirement migration, other in the lifestyle migration with mixed motives, and also those that with mixed motives, but its permanence is oscillating between two or more places. It can be half a year in Portugal, half a year in their homes, or 1 week in Portugal or 1 week, something like that. So they can, time and migration is characterized for being older and not professional active. Then we have stable lifestyle migration, distinguishing for being younger and be stable in the territory, and nomads being also younger and oscillating between 2 or more locations. And what about the needs and impact of these new incomers? They need and look for relatively cheap land for cheap land, comparing with the prices in their place of origin. Thus, the first economic impact of the coming of these immigrants was felt immediately in the acquisition of real estate properties that were not occupied, neither demanded by the scarce local population. These people that comes prefer funds for acquisition, like these ones with some constructions, even if ruins, because they rebuilt, and near the water courses, or at least with some water in the land. Other impact, other visible phenomenon begin to occur, such as the emergence of what we can call casual or accidental entrepreneurs. These are individuals that were not meant to be entrepreneurs, but that in some sense they become entrepreneurs because they were pushed by the opportunities created by the needs of the other new roles that are coming to this territory. This is the example of that Irishman that we talked before, that have a business, a bar, but he also create a real estate company to sell to the other new rules that want to come to this territory. And also small providers in construction and agriculture that are helping other newcomers to rebuild their houses, but also local markets that are organized by the community, involving a foreign community, but also locals, for exchange of small productions. And it's also felt that in the near future, a significant number of immigrants expect to start an entrepreneurial activity. Also, these new populations, especially those who come with families, with children, they need education for their children. But they also, some of them also bring new knowledge and capabilities that makes them also community entrepreneurs. And one of the evidences was the creation of an alternative school with an alternative curriculum, which in fact was indicated by the newcomers' families with children as the main reason to locate in this precise territory. This school, for instance, was a previous school that was already closed for long years, and then was reopened to receive the school that has more than 70 nationalities of children and more than 30 children in a place where before there was no children enough to open a school. Other impacts are visible in this small town. For instance, new business, even from local people. This girl that is in the photo is a local girl. That it's not local, it's Portuguese one that come to this village. And this business, for instance, emerged to sell products aimed to these new rurals, food products that usually were not consumed here, but now with the new foreign people, they are demanded. They also create critical mass for services such as health. For instance, the health for children and for pregnant people, there wasn't there. And now with these new families, the doctors begin to have this kind of services, and also the school, as we see, and also internet services. Also important is that these new people generate more influxes of people as tourists or as residents, usually friends and family of these new incomers in the territory. Other impacts that is worth mention is the concerns local governance arrangements. With investment of the local public administration in technological infrastructures that allows these new, younger and more technological literate inhabitants to access to the global net and to work globally through the internet infrastructure that they are improving now. Another important and more psychological, we can say, impact is the rebirth of the hope of the local inhabitants, especially of the few young natives who still remain in the territory. So this is the hope. We have to see if this is a mirage or is in fact the light at the end of the tunnel. So in sum, we start with 3 questions. And with this exploratory study, we arrive to some preliminary answers. Are they all the same? Well, in general, they have the higher levels of qualification. They have their lifestyle motivations with some differences, so they are not exactly the same. And they also show difference in their demographic characteristics, in their occupations, and their patterns of mobility and special frames of action. They have the economic impacts and also social impacts, since in the real estate market, the first impact, but also creating new business to serve this new population. They create more jobs, and also the very important social impacts. There are more children and young people. They activate services. They promote the creation of new infrastructures, mainly the technologics now, and also the school, and they create hope. And what are the conditions for permanence? Especially in the case of families and people of working age, the more interesting segment also for the rebirth of these territories. What they really need is the access to education, health services, technology and information infrastructures, and also important social networks. We see that these young families in particular and these young people evaluate very much the possibility to interact with their own community, but also in some cases with local and national community. Okay, so the present work focused on a chapter of the migration history in a low density territory, but this chapter will be succeeded by other chapters that are important to follow. For instance, one important aspect that succeeds now is that the international school did not open in 2020. So it's important to understand what will be the impact of this closure, since we saw that it was one important aspect, important element to call people. Okay, the other aspect is if the flow of immigrants continues to grow in the same rate, how will this affect the reception capacity and the attractiveness of this territory? Also, more studies of descriptive and quantitative nature are needed in order to provide more conclusive evidences. For instance, it's also interesting to understand the relative way of each type of immigrant, if different migrants profiles have different needs and different impacts in the territory. And also more questions need to be answered. For instance, does the profile change along their life cycle? I mean, for instance, nomad can become stable, or lifestyle casual entrepreneurs can become commercial ones. How does it happen? What are the implications of such changes? And finally, in 2020, we are facing the pandemic of COVID-19, which profoundly affects the mobility and the relationships with spaces. So what will be the future impact of this threat or similar ones in these territories? Will be a threat or will be an opportunity? Okay, and these are my questions for reflection. Thank you for your attention and for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We need to close soon. So at 12:45, the next keynote starts. So if you want to switch to this keynote, you should leave this room. Otherwise, we have a number of questions to Annabella. So I would still want to go through them. There is a question about how do the original villagers think about these newcomers? So how they accept these newcomers?
In fact, newcomers mostly are old, as I told you, but they accept it quite well, because at the beginning they were a little bit trying to understand but they are mostly curious about them. And also they are very happy to have more people there. And some of them say, oh, they are very, very nice when they pass through, when we cross in the street, they say hello. and I say hello, but they don't say anymore because they don't speak Portuguese. So there is a problem of communication, of understand. But because there are also other, for instance, Spanish people that speak English, these more Spanish people can understand and be understood by Portuguese because they are nearby the border. They act more or less as translators in some situations. But for now, it's a good reception. I'm not sure if in the future, when the land begins to be, if people want to go there and the prices begin to rise, could be a problem. But now we are still very far away from that reality. So for them, there is a very local population is very happy with these newcomers because, like you saw, they see it as the hope for not dying, for have people in the territory. And also they can make some money with them. They have more money than local people.
Okay, before we continue with the next ones, I would like to say a few words to those who are still listening to us in the live chat. So this has been a conference organized by the SPA-CEnet, the network of spatial research and planning institutions in Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe. If you want to know about SPA-CEnet more, you can contact me, or you can check our SPA-CEnet website for the next conferences. So we will now continue with the questions. There were quite some questions to you, Annabella. There was you can see all these questions also in the chat. There was a suggestion from a colleague of mine, Robert Knipschel, that we have a running project on that test that gives people an opportunity to live in a city as a test for 1 month and to see whether they can then want to, for example. There is a real laboratory like this running in the city of Görlitz. You see this in the chat, the message from Robert Knipschel. So maybe I can copy it again. Yeah, you see it? Then we have a question. Was it on the
Why this happened in
receptivity?
Panama Core?
Yes, I can find it. And there is a question of Ms. Maddalini di Pipini about finding some similar examples in Greece. And but she thinks that this case, the Portuguese case, is more promising because due to the predominant fraction of active population.
Okay, I was looking. Okay, there was I begin with Chiara Mancini that was asking why this process happened in Panama Core and not in other places. I think the notice that Panama Core was the low density area in Portugal in 2012 began to attract, and when people in 2016 were looking for low density areas where the land could be cheaper, they found it, and then they come here. And when answering to Pipini, to Magdalini, why? Yes, because these first people came, they begin to talk to the foreign community in some social networks, digital social networks, about the cheap of the land, the prices of the land, and also that there was a foreign community that was growing, and this attracted the attention of new incomers. So there was a kind of boost from this initial movement, and okay, yeah, that's it. I don't know if there is anything that I should say more, but yes, I think that was they begin to have a critical mass of immigrants that attract other immigrants to the territory.
Okay, thank you. I will close the session now. There was a very interesting session, I think, very nice presentations, and I wish you still a good day. You can now go also to this to the keynote and of Professor David Simon. And after that, there will be a closing ceremony for the whole conference. So thank you all.